Thank you. That was very kind of you, Dr. Today, I was hoping to, and thank you everyone for coming in. I know you guys have all have busy schedules and whatnot. I was hoping to discuss today perhaps how Coke Studio came about, and subsequently what processes have come off of it, and you know they're thought inspiring, and I thought I'd share some of those thoughts with you. I don't know how many of you are musical or musicians, but so some of this may seem a little technical, but I'll try and skim through the very complex details and try and stick to the stuff that that might make more sense. Now, I wanted to discuss nature, natural processes, and unnatural processes, and how they affect us in our daily life. We find that in Sufic traditions and mystical traditions, we have what is referred to as the divine sound, the sound that created everything. Perhaps in quantum physics, you can call that the theory, the string theory. But what it is that everything at a quantum level is in vibration. The spiritualists long ago call this divine, in the Hindu tradition you call it the Om, the root frequency. In Islamic traditions you call kun, the sound of, that was the command that was given for things to become. It is be. Kun means be, and it was, as the Quran says. So there's this significance of the divine origin of sound, that at the root of the beginning there was sound. Now, sound as we know it seems to be the stuff that falls on our ears, but sound actually, or vibration, is actually a spectrum. It's a frequency spectrum. It is apparently infinite. It's interesting to note where our senses are tuned. We see in a certain spectrum, we feel in a certain spectrum, we hear in a certain spectrum. And these are very interesting 5 different spectrums that we call senses, because they're all tuned to deal with different aspects of the same big spectrum. Past our senses, of course, now we know that there's the ultraviolet, the infrared, and beyond that, the micro, and this, that, the ultra, but it's important to know where our 5 senses are tuned to and why. And that's what's thought-provoking. As nature would have it, anything that has manifested or has come into the state of wujud is visible to the eyes. That's the spectrum the eyes are tuned to. So we tend to believe things that we see as real. If you can't see it, it's usually not there. But as we know, instruments are measuring a lot more, and there's a lot more in this room that we don't see. But if we had the instruments, we realize that. So reality gets a reality check, that there's more to reality than we think there is. Likewise, sound has a certain spectrum. It's there, but it's not yet manifest. You can't see it, but you know it exists. So it gives it this fluid-like state where it's still not materialized or formed into matter. In quantum sort of terminology, you'd call it a wave, whereas you'd call the spectrum of visibility particle. So you've got this wave particle, and again, in quantum physics, there's an interesting thing that at a quantum level, everything's both a particle and a wave. So we are wave and particle. Everything is, right? So, which basically shouldn't come as a surprise to us, because there's a part of me that's hidden from everybody else. That's my wave function. That's my soul, as the spiritualists will call it, and this is my body. It's that part of me that's the particle. It's manifested. So, with that sort of understanding of where our senses are tuned to, we find that nature works in a really interesting manner. It heals, it survives. It survived all this time. We're sitting here because obviously nature did something right. We're products of nature. And how it's really interesting. These may be simple things, but I think they require pondering, because the processes of nature throws this random dice into everything. We have the seed of uniqueness in us all. That's why we all look different. That's why we have fingerprints that are absolutely different. But we're all humanoids, so there's a similarity, yet there's a seed of uniqueness that separates us from each other. It even separates us from our siblings. We are different from our own siblings for a very good reason. Now, in nature, what tends to happen is if a dog's had a litter, you might sometimes find that a virus will come along and, unfortunately attack the litter. We had dogs, and it was a very sad sort of time to see some of them not survive. But some did survive. And that's what nature does with its unique seed, with its randomness. It throws in this random dice, and the virus may kill 3 out of the 5, but the 2 that survive are then immune to that particular strain of virus, and therefore it survives and continues, and that tussle keeps going on, and here we are. It's interesting because nature is perfect to 1 in a quadrillion. If we go back to the basics of the Big Bang, if it was slightly 1 in a quadrillion is 1 followed by 18 zeros. If there was a slight change in the math of what happened at the time of the Big Bang, the universe might have exploded and dissipated, or have imploded. It's so finely, it's what you call perfect imperfection. And that's nature. Now, in nature, with that sort of perfection playing out, you find that there's this amazing ratio that comes out. In music, we call it the 5th note. In the law of ratios and whatnot, it's called the pi. Here's how creation manifests. It's interesting. Unity splits into 2. It mirrors itself, and that's exactly what the effect is, what we see in music. A note becomes an octave, and that's how you get 2 notes. But an octave, interestingly, in nature is not divided by a center point. As in music we know, there isn't a center to the octave. There's a 5th that's the dominant, which is almost like a 3:2 ratio. That's what you call the 5th note. And that's interesting because had it split in the center, it would have annihilated each other. This shift to this golden mean ratio of split causes this propagation to take place, this sort of perpetuity that we find ourselves 14 billion years later that we're a part of. It's musically very balanced. Something happened along the line, though, with this. Right up till about 100 years ago, all our tuning standards were based on natural music tunings. And that's not too long ago. I mean, there's this vast thousands of years of history of mankind where we were tuned to all the old instruments, the old churches that still have those organs that are built into them. They're not the standard tuning we guys are hearing today. They're all tuned to natural tuning standards. And what are these tuning standards? So now when you have this octave, what happened 100 years ago is that somebody took that octave and divided it into 12 equal parts. And that's the 12 notes you see, the 7 white and the 5 black on a piano key, the octave. They're equally distributed. There's some ratio as to 1.82 or something each interval. And somebody did this, and that's the music we hear today. That's the music we play. But when I was working on Coke Studio, I came across some interesting Eastern musicians who did not conform to the standard. They were like, your music's a little distasteful to us. And I said, what's this old man talking about? I mean, he needs to upgrade to the way the music, is now, and what's it? But he kept saying, son, I believe your ears are not as finely tuned as they should be. And you tend to dismiss that as nonsense. But then he made me go through it. He said, why don't you actually listen to the note I'm suggesting as the alternative? He was an ustad. And with a sort of smirky attitude, I gave it a listen. And sure enough, there was something there. I mean, if one had to be honest and truthful, yes, the note he was suggesting, which was off the scale, he was like, why don't you play your piano key along with the note I'm singing and see how off it is? And it was off. And the one he was singing sounded quite sweet. So I was like, what's going on here? And that sort of, got me going and thinking. This was pre-Coke Studio, mind you. Coke Studio was a product that came out of this. Subsequently, I, as a lot of people thought, probably I'd lost myself or I'd gone crazy or gone bananas. But I kind of became a bit of a recluse, went into hiding for about a year and subjected myself to these tones and frequencies. I was like, what's going on? What's this whole this invisible world right before us that's hidden? It's masked out, and here we have these, because I'd been in a band all my life, and we'd always thought we played good music, and we knew what something was when it was in tune and something that wasn't in tune. But here something came along and challenged that. And that sort of had a domino effect on my understanding of the world in general as to what other things do we believe as the gospel truth, literally, and probably a need to be challenged or revisited. So anyway, being musical, I started exposing myself to these frequencies. At the age of 30, I wore glasses, probably too much computer. And here's a funny thing that started happening in that room in that 1 year. So I was exposing myself to pure tones and frequencies and electronically generated. So obviously I got into the math of it. I realized that there's the Fibonacci law of ratios that play out in nature, and what this gentleman was exposing me to was one of those naturally tuned ratios. He was playing me the major third, Sare Ga, as you call it, the Gandhar within the spectrum. So the major third is one of the most affected notes in this distribution, equal distribution of the octave. And when it first came out about 100 years ago, there was a revolt in Europe. They called it the devil's third. It was so vile to the people because their ears were actually tuned to natural music. I mean, you guys can go do your own, research past this if any of this interests you. But yes, it was called the devil's third. It was so vile, but now it's become a standard. here's what started happening in that room. I didn't need my glasses in 3 months. I was healing at a cellular level. My hair started growing. Well, it was always a bit long, but started actually growing faster than ever before. And I was not the only one benefiting from the exposure to these frequencies. I had a plant in the corner of my room. I'd got a little corner. And it was a money plant there that just went crazy. It started, I thought it was coming towards me because one shoot of it was halfway down the room, and I was, what's with this plant? And I eventually picked it up and put it near the speaker. It wrapped itself around the speaker. It just went, and subsequently, if anybody who knows me or visits my place, I'm surrounded by plants because I believe they give me a good indicator as to where the positive energies in a home are. You put within a room, you'll realize that there are positive and negative spaces, and you don't want to be sleeping in a negative space in a room, and plants are good ways to identify. If a plant's happy in a place, you're going to be happy in a place. So that's something to bear in mind. But within that 1 year, what started happening was strange things started happening. I became hypersensitive. These frequencies were doing stuff to me. They were breaking me down, and it was almost like a metamorphosis of sorts where I believe, well, I hope, the caterpillar became the butterfly, but there was definitely a transformation going on. But the more the transformation happened within the room, the more I realized that I was not suited to the outside world. All the music I'd ever listened to, the Zeppelin, Floyd, you name it, all the stuff that we've grown up listening to, Doors and stuff, I just couldn't hear it anymore. It did not sound right, and that was a very scary reawakening into the world. Because it can't all be wrong, but that's what it seemed. So basically what had happened was I'd tuned myself into an alternative reality. And so vivid was that reality, that's so real, that I tied a string on my finger. An invisible string, apparently. It's still there. I know it's there. I know nobody else can see it. But it's to remind me that that reality exists, and it's a very real reality. Subsequently, I've had to dull myself out back again to come back into the world and produce shows like Coke Studio, because they're not completely tuned to that understanding, but there is a sense of it in there. Because I really thought I needed to come out and do something with this understanding because of the amount of emotions it had. Because I believe what standard tuning is doing to us as an effect is dulling us out a bit. If I can give you a sort of equation, the way I've sort of understood it for myself, I've kind of concluded that my female woke up in that 1 year and that's why I became so sensitive. And I believe the world right now is a very male-oriented world. It doesn't matter whether you're female in body or you're born a woman or a man. We're talking about the feminine side that everybody possesses and the masculine side that everybody possesses. And I believe the world, sort of the Newtonian world that we live in, the very physical world, is a very masculine world, whereas the spiritual world is a very feminine world. And the feminine world makes, if you delve too much onto one side, you find that that's going to make you very, very sensitive. And the masculine side is going to make you, all the traits of masculinity, which are, it's interesting because in further trying to understand this, one goes through the 99 attributes of God, which is supposed to be the wisdom of Adam. Because I did turn to scripture for for an understand, not just Islam, to all the scriptures in the world, for an understanding as to the deeper, you know, mystical things that might be going on. And I kind of concluded that within the 99 names of God, there were more feminine attributes than masculine attributes. So it was an important, like the doer is a masculine attribute. The merciful is a feminine attribute. So that person who, I believe the relationship you have within yourself is your female side thinks, your masculine side acts upon it. And a balanced person will think before they act. A very masculine person will have all the energy. He'll eventually get something done, but he may take 3 or 4 tries in doing it. The very feminine will just keep thinking and will just not get anything done. She needs a relationship with her male in order, and so that's our internal balance. So it's the same as the yin and yang. We have the Jalal and the Jamal attributes. And I believe all of us, I don't know how many of you have crossed the age of midlife crisis, but anybody who has, I believe that's a misunderstood phenomena in the human thing. I believe that's where this transformation happens. It struck me when I was 39 going on to 40. And strangely enough, that's usually the time that it's also struck prophethood. Most of the prophets at this time went through this. Please, I'm not suggesting I'm some sort of prophet. Don't have me, killed or stoned to death or something. I'm just saying, I think everybody goes through this. I mean, just for the record. And it's an important thing to recognize, because there is a transformation in personality, and a lot of times what you call the men tend to get a little more chilled out, women become more aggressive. You see these fundamental shifts in personalities. So I believe it needs study, it needs more attention as to what these phenomena are. So here was the thing now. Now I couldn't listen to that music. I came out of this 1 year later hungry. My soul was hungry. Now what do I feed this new me? Because the current art was just not doing it. At least the art of music was, and I was desperately looking for, and I found stuff. And here's the thing. If you go out, there are these chimes that are tuned to natural tunings, and I've got a great collection of them. There are all these bells. There are all these things from medieval times that have survived. There are people who swear by it. There's the Nashville guitar tuning, which is tuned on a completely different understanding. It exists. It's there. It's just not common. The more common is this standard that seems to dull us out a bit. So when I recently came across the effects of food, unnatural and genetically altered food on the physical body, it left me wondering, what are the effects of unnatural music on the soul? And it's not just saying music is food for the soul. I think that needs an understanding, and where my understanding of that comes from is that there's the law of resonance. Likely things resonate with each other. Any musician will tell you if they've got a guitar and somebody else has a guitar, if one's tuned to a D note, if you strike it, the guitar on the other part of the room will start, the D string on it will start vibrating. That's a law of resonance playing out. Similar things will start reacting to each other. If you've ever sung in the bathroom, you'll suddenly notice your voice may become very loud. You've hit the resonant frequency of the bathroom with your voice. So it gets amplified, and there's this goonj, as we call it. Right? That's you striking a chord with something similar. Now, why is music affecting the soul? From how I have understood it, is that you take any two opposites and you plot out its center. Like you have things exist in these three phases. Like you have gas on one end, vapor, you have ice on the other, and you have water in the middle. So you find that those are the three states. You have past, you have the future, you have the present. And that's how you tend to find the center of anything or any situation. Happiness, sadness, contentment. It's a great exercise. You might find that if you're drifting towards a certain emotion, or you find that you're excessively leaning towards a certain kind of emotion, find its opposite, and introduce that, or see how you can get a bit of that. Because all these things tend to throw us off balance. The eventual idea should be that we should want to find the center of things. There's the positive, there's the negative, there's the neutral. There's the spirit, there's the body, there's the soul. There's the unmanifest, there's the matter, manifest, there's the wave, as we discussed earlier. So all these things in the middle tend to resonate with each other. So the soul being in the center will resonate to the wave that's in the center. It's similar. So we think, if you kind of like get that, then you realize that emotions are created in the soul. And that's how music is able to affect emotion, right? And thus feeds it. And that's what the soul is surviving on. Now there are two aspects to it. There's the octave being divided into the equal temperaments, and then there's also the 440 hertz that's playing out, which was again introduced in the 1950s as a world standard. 440 hertz is where we tune our A note to in all the musical instruments of the world, except for military bands and certain religious institutions. They have different tunings. Other than that, the consumer level music is all tuned to 440. Unfortunately, that's not where nature is tuned. And by nature, we mean all the processes of nature. We've got the moon cycle, we've got the sun frequency, we've got the earth frequency, we've got all the planets, they're going around, they're creating these wave frequencies, and all of them produce certain frequencies that are very subsonic, hundreds of octaves below our hearing range, but they're there. So we know it's not just a rock, the moon is not just this rock going around, it's also this, it's a particle and the wave, and the wave affects us. And thus the moon cycles affect us. So this new 440 hertz is also unnatural. So my question, since this is you all university students and whatnot, is to ponder over whether, we see what genetically altered food has done. We see the issues of obesity. We see it looks, those apples look really good, but they don't taste as good. Anybody will tell you. Like we saw, the randomness of nature, it has healing properties. The randomness in music has healing properties for the soul. Just because we can't see our soul, the question is it obese? Is it crying out? Is it in distress? What are we feeding it? And before any of you sort of locks themselves up in a room and starts, subjecting yourself to the frequencies, I tell you, the world's not a place for that mind. It's just not that anymore. So I don't know, it's just food for thought and I thought I'd bring it out here because I was left with this challenge as to what do I do with this information now that I've exposed myself to it? So I thought I'd create the project called Coke Studio. And within it are Western-tuned instruments. But there's also a process of trying to avoid conflicts within where the tunings of the Western instruments do not clash with the Eastern instruments. My instructions to the musicians used to be, skip the note he's singing, just leave that space, and usually you'd want to keep a note that the singer's singing, so that, you know, them being together will produce an interesting result. I'd say skip it. Try and give them that space, and the result of it is Coke Studio. I mean, it comes from those processes. It comes from the East meeting the West, and from what I've understood of it, and from the reaction people give, is that it's been a successful experiment, and maybe that's what the world needs today: a common place where the old standards meet the new standards, and they coexist in harmony, and where there's not just focus on the material, but also on the spirit. You know, it ties into the same thing. So I had a interesting comment on one of the songs by a listener, and probably obviously had good ears or something. He said, "Sounds flat." She's singing flat, but strangely sounds okay. And that's what it is. It's that coming together. It's not really flat. Our concept of it is flat. So that, I mean, there are other things I may leave you with, what nature can offer. If we take nature into our everyday life, nature's anti-monopoly. And we know monopolies are a big issue these days. When we take on natural processes, for example, if a computer manufacturer was using natural processes, he wouldn't be buying all the drives from one manufacturer as a source. So if there's ever a recall, you know, if you have 5 vendors supplying, and if there was ever a recall, just a fifth of the computers would be recalled. Not all of them. That's nature playing out. That's a natural process. Like we saw that all the puppies didn't die. There was redundancy in the system. Some survived. We'd find, maybe 2 vendors' hard drives died. That's still, 3 move on. And we can build these natural processes into businesses. The day somebody makes electronics that hum in tune, in good tune. Oh my God, I was in upstate New York. I thought I'd get a break from, I'd been in Istanbul, and I just wanted to peace and quiet. But there was this fridge in that house. And oh my God, every time I had to eventually just go and pull the plug out. Vile. Because, it rattled. We can hear it in this room as well. See? Now, if these were tuned, that's not very difficult to do. If they knew what the magic frequencies were, if this wouldn't rattle our brains, we'd feel really good. We'd want to go and buy more electronics that hum, right? So these are things we can, I believe, learn from nature and bring into our everyday life to have a better life, I hope. That's all I have to share. Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Rohail, for this thought-provoking presentation. As you were talking, all sorts of ideas came to my mind. Right. And especially because you evoked kun fayakun and the whole mystical traditions within Islam. And as you know, there's always been this big debate about whether music is haram or halal and all these, and they're just opposite spectrums.
Sure.
And people tend to say, well, there can be very good qualities in music, and there can be also very bad qualities in music. And there's that distinction that they make in Sufi treatises. So very often, like for example, Hujwiri Datta Ganj Baksh,
Yes.
who's buried in Lahore, writes in his book that music, the effect that music can have on a person really depends on what's inside the person.
Right.
And it accentuates. And it's also certain types of music. So, so Rumi, for example, when he talks about music and the effect that it has on him, and we have lots of stories, how he became hypersensitive to sound, maybe through a similar process of isolation that he went through, but he became hypersensitive to sound. There's stories about him walking through the bazaar and hearing a goldsmith, with his hammer tapping away, and that got him into an ecstasy. And he started sort of whirling. Or, somebody selling fox furs, but in Turkish, saying dilgu, dilgu, which means, but he interpreted it in Persian to mean, where's the heart, and that got him into another but then the way he explains why he became hypersensitive to this music and why he was so tuned in was he talks about it going back again to this primordial moments, where he talks about, where he refers to this Quranic verse where before creation comes into being, God says, Alastu bi rabbikum, am I not your Lord? So there's the sound. And then creation jumps into existence. In some of his poetry, he talks about it jumps onto the other side. It jumps from the side of not being into being. Right? And manifests in all things like flowers and willows and all this. But when it jumps across into the state of being, it's dancing. But it's also saying, Bala Shahidna, yes, we witness it. And so he says that when human beings hear music, depending on the nature of their soul, it sometimes can bring memories of primordial moments. So in a certain way, it's subconscious in there, in the soul. And when you hear certain music and it resonates with that, it sets you off onto this, this almost experience of transcendence, and so on. So you feel that you are you are in another world. Totally.
Absolutely.
In any case, so that was some of these things that you find in traditional sort of music, sort of things within the mystical traditions of Islam, the spiritual tradition. So I was wondering, how do you correlate that to what you talked about? Are there ways in which, because you had a certain framework, and here's another framework, which has been, which is very traditional, kind of, Sufi kind of thing. And so somebody who's familiar with the two, is there a way you can bridge this? Or do you see are they trying to get to the same thing, or what is it?
I believe from the exposure I had to the gentleman who enlightened me on the alternate tunings, it seemed he had all the theoretical knowledge of it, but didn't have the science behind. I think I was more curious about what was going on from a scientific perspective, and figured that these are all these. It's the Fibonacci ratios playing out, and subsequently I've figured out that in Eastern music we have 22 notes within the octave. As far as science is concerned, there are over 700 musical intervals or ratios between an octave. So, and you'll find that different cultures, the Chinese, the Hungarians, the Europeans, the Turkish, they all use their own sets of tunings, and some of it just doesn't really, it sounds, as you might, anybody who might have heard world music, some of it that just doesn't sound right to us. It's not that it's not right, it's just that our ears are tuned very differently. It's almost, you can equate it to if enough people call blue yellow, then blue becomes yellow, because the majority tend to decide what something is. So we have gotten so used to the modern tuning that when we hear anything else, we tend to call that off. Our sense of what's off and on is dictated by our own exposure and by a majority viewpoint. So that's I guess the parallel I can bring between because I've read the mystical aspect of it, but it stays mystical, and that's where it's mystical. I believe now there's the science to back it up. And that's how you can now in computers type in all the ratios, and of course there's softwares that allow you to do that. So I'm not talking about things that other people don't know about, or these standards that don't exist. It's just that it's not mainstream, and one wonders why. Why is this mainstream? Because this has some notes that should not be exposed to anybody. They're musically, they're nowhere. So one wonders, and that's all I leave it at, is that I wonder why. Why is it so?
Yeah. I think already the question of what's mainstream very often is connected with power. And who has power determines what's mainstream.
That's right.
Yeah. So it's interesting. All right. So I would just open up for questions, but I have a request that before you ask your question, wait for the mic to come. This is so that we can record your question, because people may be able to hear you, but we need to get that recorded too. So Abhishek has the mic. So, all right. So we have a couple of questions here. So we have one here, and then you want a question. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming and for
Thank you.
sharing your perspective on nature and things.
Thank you.
It was.
Oh, we can't.
Is it working?
Okay. So you may want to speak a little bit louder.
Okay. So my question is, considering everything that you said about nature, anti-monopoly, and these things, and what Professor Asani has said about power, how does Coke fit into this?
Good question, right?
Coca-Cola.
And it almost seems like a contradiction of sorts that you've got and the contradiction sort of goes to another level when you take in and bring in the fact that a Jewish American company in Pakistan to become this loved show is, with all these contradictions playing out. When I first set out to do a show like Coke Studio, I was looking for, I was pretty sure it was never going to be with a multinational company, because I didn't think any multinational company would support an idea like this. And although there was a little initial resistance to the concept of fusion music, but it wasn't from any conspiracy sort of aspect. It was simply, who's going to want to listen to traditional music? I'm like, come on, let's bring in a little bit more youth into it and that sort of thing. So that was the only concern. I found that the values that the product had, and every brand has its own values, and I'm not sitting here sort of advocating. You've asked the question, so I'm bringing it up. Their values were about inclusiveness. Their values were about sharing. Their values, all the values one needed to actually get a message like this across or out there. Not every, I know, because I've worked with other brands, and you need platform, you need finances, you need amplification for ideas to get out there. Here was a brand that had all of them. They're, what do you call it? They have like a brand charter of sorts, all about these values. They don't believe they're selling a sugary drink. They believe they're selling happiness. They do. It's in their charter. And they're reforming. As they're becoming more aware that sugar might not, in its current sort of way, be the right thing. I believe they're changing. And so yes, there's a contradiction in there, but I believe the values are where we came together. But not every, now imagine, not every brand is going to let you do Allahu as an opening season song.
Well, Coke will let you if it makes money. I mean, come on.
I'll tell.
It's Coke. You know, I'm more thinking about it, and I don't mean to put you on spot about what are the policies of Coke.
Right.
But, you know, it's not about inclusiveness, what they do to indigenous populations in Pakistan, but
Without-
also throughout the world. But that's a different topic. But I just
Sure, I understand, but what I'm telling you from my experience of, because I have worked.
You're not responsible at all for what
Not
Coke
at all,
does.
sure, and I don't take it upon myself. I don't take any offense to it either. I just say that I know for a fact there are a lot of other multinationals who didn't think that it was smart to be doing Allahu, and I've worked with them as well. So I have to, you know, give them their due share. They were okay with spirituality, although within their own charter they stay away from any kind of religious thing, and this was the whole thing. This was not about religion. It was about you know, a concept coming through, and they've been okay with it. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Susan. I'm from the community, not a scholar, so maybe you can help me shape my question.
Okay.
But I'm looking for the concept of find the middle, and say on extremes, oppression, colonialism, on another place, peace, looking for the middle. And at one point you said military bands aren't tuned to, and then I looked in my notes, I couldn't find it. But I'm kind of asking the question, what could, in a sense of sound, bring, you know, the calming of the world and less conflict? This is a large global question, so perhaps some kind of comment.
But it's a great question. It's like you zoom out and you see, yes. It depends on whether you want to take colonialism as, I mean, if you were to take that as one end, there was obviously a failure at another end to allow colonialism to come into, right? So perhaps, I mean, the opposite of that would be, it's thought-provoking, but what would be the middle of that? Well, I guess. Well, to some extent, I guess we, as Pakistani people or Indians, are your perfect example of what comes out of the two, when the two meet, where you have colonial influence and you've got Eastern values. I'm speaking to you in English. It's not my native language, but here I'm doing it because there's, you know, that's a colonial, you know, remnant of sorts. So I guess, unfortunately, I have to add that there's colonialism, and then there's the kind of colonialism we experienced, and they're two very different. You'll find that the French colonial, wherever they ruled, left traditions very intact. Unfortunately, wherever the British went, things culturally we were just left in tatters. You know, we were not called the jewel in the crown for the money we had. It was for the knowledge we had. Our Ayurvedic medicine system and music is light years ahead of its time in terms of things. But it was the way it was projected, and it is to date. Anybody who's practicing that is almost looked down upon as, you know, a primitive person, and if you're not modern, you're I don't know how to put it, but you're just not that accepted into mainstream. I think. I'll give you an example. I meet a lot of people who hold traditional values close to them, And one of the things they do is, as we in subcontinental people will know, people sit on the ground and eat. And we find that only our servants and drivers do that. They sit on the floor and eat. Whereas we sit up Victorian style and eat on a table. So this guy was telling me, he was like, you know, it's unnatural to sit on the table and eat. We don't have the problems you guys have, and they don't have the problems we have, strangely enough. His logic was that the stomach curls up as you sit on the ground more, so you eat less. The Victorian style, even going to the loo, we have different bathrooms. You peek into the bathroom, you say, oh, it's the servant's bathroom I've walked into. Sorry, because they'll have this ground seating where you squat and go to the loo. We sit up in the Victorian style, and you know, they eat with their hands. They'll suck their fingers dry after they've eaten. We'll use the fork and knives. They call us very unnatural people. And then they wonder why we wonder where we get all our illnesses from. So I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with the Western standard or the Victorian ways. I'm just telling you their mindset. They believe they're closer to nature because that's how the bodies evolved over the thousands of years, is to squat and go to the loo. You know, I mean, that's the thing. So I don't know the medical connotations of that, but here we are. We're the Victorian Asians, the in-between hybrids left over from the colonial era. Yes. Yes, that's something I remember I came across this. I think it might be worth a Google search. But I remember I was left wondering, because I was going through all these tuning standards, and I came across different standards for different militaries in the world. And they were tuned way higher, and I wonder whether that was to invoke a certain kind of excitement in them to do better in battle, or I don't know where that comes from, but I certainly saw it.
Thank you, Rohail. And thank you for bringing vibrations and basic things like that. But you know, musicians always are said to have a special ear for sounds and notes. Non-musicians like me are called tone deaf, you know, so you know, we do not perceive sound as well or vibrations as well,
right,
apparently. So so in the process of your production, you know, you said you became sensitive to these different notes and all through the person who introduced you to them. But how much was your original instincts playing, and how much? And you went into the science of it also. So when you were making decisions, you know, what were you using? How much of intuition, your old experience, just making the choice of this is the melody? Because yes, there are many songs which are flat, but they sound very well. So something was happening, a magic was being created. But I just wonder, if it was all that new sensitivity, or it was the a musician's ear also.
Interestingly, since I'd also been part of a band that did 4 albums and had a success, and that was all before I sort of woke up to this reality. So I had a measuring tool to go back and see what was going on then. What was the vital signs the band I was in running off of, and I found that some songs by fluke, and were the popular songs as well, but by fluke, turned out all right, and some were horrific, unbearably bad, and or violated these new laws that I'd come across. So that became a good reference as to go back to see how much I knew before I woke up and what was playing out. And so it was this, I'd say it was random prior to the understanding. And I'm not saying every song that comes out of Coke Studio is now all right. No, not at all. It's just these are pure experiments. For me, at least, that's what the Coke Studio sessions are. Experiments that I throw out there, and sometimes to see the sort of effect they have on people. And it's almost like you release something and you sit back and wait, and the comments start popping back in, and people start talking about, and a lot of people have gotten back with spiritual experiences out of the songs. It's not uncommon phenomena in the Coke studio realm where people say, wow, certain songs have affected us. And then I know, at a deeper level, I know what's under the hood affecting, because it had those certain frequencies in there. So it's a good way of sending a message out in the bottle and seeing what comes back to you. And those were my experiments, and they continue to date. So I hope that.
Hi, thank you for your talk. It was really great. And I was fascinated about what you were saying about the Western and Eastern tunings and how you would try to create the space for them to meet. So can you talk more about the musical technical aspects of that? And was it just tuning, or are there other musical elements that you worked with to create that space?
Right. One very important thing that one came across, and this is something we're exposed to every day. Have you ever wondered why something feels fast? I mean, you call a certain process fast, and you call certain other processes slow. What's the yardstick? Why is something fast? What's your perception of fast? When does fast become slow? Because slow could be very fast for something else, right? Where's your own yardstick? Where's that pulse? It's the heartbeat, right? And in musical terms, we know that the heart beats on average around 60 to 90 beats per minute. So if you're creating music in that range, it's normal music. It's music that makes us feel normal. Slow it down, it becomes lounge and ambient, and it starts. What our heartbeat starts doing is it wants to gravitate towards it. It starts relaxing, and we all know what happens when we start going above 90 to 100, and you start grooving, and then nightclub music comes in, and then you want to dance. Above 110, it's all. So it was the rhythm, the understanding of how you're affected by rhythm, and it's all about the heart. It's how you affect. That's what a good movie is. It's playing with the heart. It's got you on edge, but then it'll let you off, and then your heart slowly. So you can plot out these things, and sometimes they can have a negative effect as well. If somebody hasn't thought out what the heart's going to be doing in the course of 90 minutes or 120 minutes, however long the movie is, it can go horribly wrong as well. And some people have a horrible experience in movies. They're like, oh, they might attribute it to the plot or to the thing, but no, there are other layers playing out. It's how our heart is a very why a heart is equated with emotion? Because it's the most sensitive organ. It's not really the heart that actually feels. It's just the most sensitive organ, and any little change in the heart affects us. So within the Eastern music world, I saw that they started performances, usually if you head out to Eastern classical, in what they call the Vilimbat, the 5 beats per minute. That's not even sleep state, that's way below alpha. That's 5 beats a minute. A classical performance will start from there, but it'll end at a high, and they'll take you through this gradient of an experience. And all that it's doing is it's taking you from that trance-like state and bringing you back up. So that, I believe, was also a very important aspect. And of course, in our modern sort of way, we try that in Coke Studio, and kind of like, guys would say, okay, now he's going to ask you to start going faster. And, it became a sort of thing. And I was like, yes, exactly. We've got to just pep it up just a little bit right at the end and leave it there. So, and we see that has an effect and was part of the experiments. So it's where you have, if you plot it, it's not just the tone, it's tone and rhythm together going and forming this very powerful medium. And that's what you get from the Eastern philosophy. And you call tal and sur, as they call it. Tone and rhythm.
Just to follow up.
Yeah.
Who was controlling the tempo? Was it the Eastern musicians?
No, I believe that's where the philosophy of it was coming from. The understanding, because all my life I'd played music, it would just be set the tempo to, the singer would say, this is too fast, or this is too... There was no real understanding of how this was going to eventually affect somebody. And the common thing that we'd experience was in studios we'd make an album and the tempo sounded fine. The moment we went live, it looked like it's dragging a bit, for God's sake, because the energy in the room used to be completely different. And if I start talking slower, the energy in the room will start changing, right? I mean, and I can make the energy in the room hyper, or anybody can, right? So it's this nature of our heart to adapt to the environment. Has anybody ever wondered why vacations, which people take, what's going on there? What's the engine underneath a place that you visit and you say, wow, I'm fresh again. I can live another year now. I'll save up and it's the energy at that place that's playing out is that it's got a calming effect on you, your heart's thing, the waves, or people can take vacations and I don't think you should, but people can take them in hyper places as well, and then that's where the thrill rides and all that comes on. It's all music playing out. I mean, the laws of music are not, it doesn't just play out in musical form. I believe it plays out in life, in everyday life. You start seeing it like that.
So Rohail, thank you very much for a wonderful talk. You mentioned a couple of things, but before I ask my question, I just want to quickly set the context for my question.
Right.
I came across Coke Studio about 5 years ago, and ever since I have started this habit, believe it or not, to go back and re-listen to it like so many times that it has become sort of a practice for me to go into a trance mode to get my fix. And I found it to be a very emotional, charged up experience. And you mentioned how there's so much behind that. And so my question is basically twofold.
Yes.
One is, come Monday morning, what are some of the ways that we can be in tune with the sound of the nature? You mentioned about organic food and altered food. Coke Studio obviously is an exemplar as far as most of us are concerned, or probably all of us are concerned throughout the world. What are some of the ways we can sort of keep up this habit of staying in tune so that we're harmonized with nature? That's one question. And the other sort of side thing is you mentioned quantum physics. Should I just hold off on the second part and let you answer the first one?
Entirely up to you.
Okay. So let me pause it. I'll pass it.
Sure. Well, I can share with you my exercises, and I, on Christmas Day, went out on the roof and lived on the roof for 3 months, and not just a roof, just completely cut off from the, and I, much to Kathleen's, I know people were trying to get through, but you have to do that, and I've, in order to get what I was trying to do in this round was get into the moon cycles, and and sure enough, it was like I was completely cut off. Close friends would come in, and I started noticing, I was like, can't they tell it's a full moon and it's all going to pass in a few days? They're bringing all these everybody during full moon time starts having these emotional sort of episodes. And they do. They just get a little more hyper, and then they think the world's coming to an end, and there are all these issues, and you just have to weather it for them. And a couple of days later, it's all okay. And you get into sync. You realize we're all affected by it. Every day there are different things happening. I don't believe astrology is this, what it's become, unfortunately. It's pure math. I'd say get into the root aspects of, into better astrology. There's a beautiful science at work there. These are not, concepts. So I would suggest numerology, right, is playing out. It's a, just by what your name is, half your personality is defined. If you don't believe it, try it out. And now with the internet, it's it's so easy to actually go on to these natural processes. And I'll give you an example. In Boston, first thing I've noticed, water's too acidic. Right? I immediately need to add more alkaline into my food intake. That's what you call a bad hair day, right? Too much acidity in the water, hair feels like, ugh. I was in upstate New York, water was to my body condition. To everybody it'll be different, mind you, because we're all different. So that's being in sync or in touch with. Now it might be that at the purification plant they're putting in too many chemicals, and the water's becoming acidic. But every time you bathe, you're absorbing that acidity into your body. And one of the things about going to a nice place for a vacation is a nice place will have pH 7.2 balanced water, right? So it's these little things, being in touch. What to feed yourself in terms of there's this medicine system we call Tib. I don't know if anybody's heard Tib. It comes from the Greeks, and then the Arabs took it and refined it, and then within our subcontinental thing, we've got the Ayurvedic thing in it as well. Fantastic. It tells it kind of like syncs you up with the tasir, jisko kehte hain, everything has a temperament of hot and cold and dry and moist. So this condition that the environment we're sitting in is cold and dry right now, right? So fear as an emotion is a cold and moist, cold sweat, right? Anger is hot and dry. So if you're prone to too much anger, what you need is cold and moist, more cold and moist. And they say drink a glass of cold water. If you're angry, it's about conditioning. So nature will. That's how you interact with it. You understand yourself. The important thing is to realize that you're not going to change the world around you, but the one thing you can change is yourself. Right? So there's an interesting proverb that goes something like this: that if you are to go out into the world, surely there will be thorns and stones that will hurt your feet. Now you've got two options. You can cover the world in leather and walk on it, or you can put on a pair of shoes. What's easier to do? We spend too much time in our lives changing others and worrying about what others are doing and what others have or don't have. It's about the self. And I think that's what nature, being closer to nature, does to you, is that it starts to fix your perception of things, and you start celebrating diversity and the uniqueness and things, as in nature it does. Every leaf on a tree, that's the Fibonacci law playing out. You ever seen the canopy that comes across on top of forests? You know why that canopy is there? Because leaves are not blocking the sunshine of other leaves. If you notice the way they open out, they all get sunshine. So there's no cannibalism going on within a plant. A plant will not block its own leaves' sun, right? And if we're closer to nature as people, we wouldn't do that. I wouldn't block what belongs to. I'd give way. Because I'd get what I am getting, and I'd let But we want to hoard everybody's share. Unnatural. So I guess, I mean, I could go on and on and on. My whole life's about studying processes of nature, but I mean, you can, I think, in everyday terms, look for these little clues from nature and see how they're playing out.
Thank you very much. And a very quick follow-up question. So I am a big believer in like divine design of things, and you today gave another evidence of how things are meant for design. And a quick example is recently, just about maybe a year ago, I've started to look into quantum physics in terms of the double slit experiments, the dual particle and wave nature, and you bring it up today,
Right.
which is sort of amazing, and I'm getting chills when I was getting chills when you mentioned it. How it's related to sound, because you mentioned unmanifested, the wave function collapses, the wave function makes a particle. My question is, if you can maybe a little bit clarify how you're mapping the sound, nature of sounds. So I get the manifested part, which is when you strike something, you hear it, it's manifested.
Right.
Can you maybe provide some clarity about what you mean by unmanifested, the waveness of the sound?
Yes, I think the important thing to understand is that and I tried to say that up front, was that our perception of sound is this sound that I'm producing, right? By divine sound, we mean the universal vibration. So it transcends the frequency spectrum of the airs. That means visibility is also a sound, right? It's a vibration. And the definition of a sound is a body in vibration. But the fact that it's falling into your ears means it's in 20 to 20 kilohertz is when it's there, you call it sound. It doesn't stop there. It just keeps going. That spectrum's infinite. It's as infinite and you know, how do you wrap yourself around infinity? But if you can just keep going, it gets wider and wider and wider as a waveform at the bottom and smaller and smaller and smaller at the top. And in between that, it passes these certain states that we call reality. You see, anything that doesn't fall into our five senses, if you can't hear it, smell it, touch it, hear it, see it, you're like, it doesn't exist. But that's not really reality as we understand reality now. So we're just tapping into not even a slither or fragment of reality. So yes, do other dimensions exist within this room? I'm certain they do. I'm sure they do, right? And you can draw parallels between this way. I believe since we are in the dimension of the third right now, a text says that we have fallen from the seventh and are transitioning back. So death might just be the transition between the third to the fourth dimension. Because this certainly would scientifically also, physically also, be the only reality that gels into matter. Which is why the dead are not coming back in physical form. So it's just, so Rumi said it beautifully. Death? Why should I be worried about death? When I was mineral, from mineral I became plant. From plant I became animal. From animal I became human. Well, I'm just on a journey, right? So I guess that's a way of looking at or interpreting the ascent back into through the dimensions and back into the Satwa Asman, as we call it, right? But there is something to it. I love it when and I believe that's what quantum physics is doing. It's no longer science or religion. I think the OR has become the AND, and that's a very important thing. I see them go hand in hand beautifully. I'm even open to the fact that the atheist, in his understanding of God, is closer to God than the God you and I believe in. How do you wrap your head around that? Because by the very definition of God, it is the entity that doesn't exist. It's pre-existence. It's pre-manifestation. It is absolute nothingness. So when the atheist is sitting there saying God doesn't exist, he may be absolutely right without realizing it. That he might have actually defined God in its truest sense. The absolute nothingness. Because only absolute nothingness can be everywhere. The moment it's something, something can't be in everything. Right? So I don't think we should judge, is my point. It's universal. Sometimes we tend to we form concepts of what we believe are, I mean, think about it. You can't conceive the concept of God, right? If you do, it isn't God anymore. Nothing becomes something. And you can't, the moment it becomes something. And that's exactly how it has described itself. Your thoughts cannot reach me. I'm inconceivable. The moment you think of the inconceivable, you've given it a form and shape. So that's quantum playing out for you. Yeah, the quirkiness of quantum playing out. Yeah.
Thank you.
Welcome. One important thing is that when I say music became, the modern tunings became unhealthy, it was because of the state I was in, right? It might not have that effect on everyone, right? It was because I had tuned myself out of this particular realm and reality. So it started becoming more unacceptable. Yes, indeed, the exposure to certain frequencies are a very powerful thing. It's the stuff of magic, right? Abracadabra, the system of rags, it's not just a scale. It's like an equation. You have to follow certain patterns. When you follow certain patterns, they form a rag, and you have to perform that rag in that pattern, right? So it becomes a formula. And the ancients had mapped these out, and these were formulas to invoke certain emotions. And they'd take a rag and blend it with another one and create these, I believe with the fact that everything's now so bound down to these 12 notes, we are only exposed to these few emotions that music is able to create. That diversity within it is. So in effect, what is happening is when you start taking in notes that are actually not really good for the conscience, it's affecting you, it does leave you vulnerable in certain ways. And those vulnerabilities might be, I'm not saying that you'd immediately be able to go off cigarettes, but you perhaps will have a fighting chance to not want it. If it's unhealthy, your body will reject it itself, because that's what starts happening. You start craving for things that help you. I want that oil. It makes my body. You start listening to the body, and that's what it does to you. It opens up your connection and your communication with your own self, which I believe then is very healing.
All right.